Dr. Naomi Fielding had spent 4 months aboard the survey vessel Threnic Vale being politely, thoroughly ignored, and she had made a kind of uneasy peace with it. She was the only human assigned to the mission, a joint research exchange between Earth's Scientific Consortium and the Tanuvin Stellar Institute, granted, she suspected, more as a diplomatic courtesy than out of any real expectation that her contributions would matter. The Threnic Vale was, by any measure, an extraordinary vessel, a state-of-the-art survey ship built around Aura, one of the most advanced predictive modeling intelligences the Tanuvin had ever developed, capable of processing stellar phenomena data and generating confident, detailed forecasts in a fraction of the time human astrophysics had ever managed through traditional methods. Naomi did not use Aura's models unless she had to. This fact had made her, over 4 months, something of a curiosity aboard the ship, not disliked, exactly, but gently, persistently dismissed, the way a colleague might dismiss someone who still did arithmetic on paper in an age of instantaneous calculation. You could save yourself considerable time, Chief Analyst Bream told her, not for the first time, during a research briefing in the ship's primary lab. He was a sharp-featured Tanuvin data scientist, brilliant by any reasonable measure, and utterly convinced of it. Aura's predictive models have a verified accuracy rate exceeding 99.6% across every stellar classification we've surveyed. Your manual verification process takes, on average, 6 times longer to reach conclusions Aura reaches in minutes. I know, Naomi said, not looking up from the physical notebook she was working in, an old habit from her graduate years that she'd never fully abandoned, despite the raised eyebrows it consistently drew. I still like to check. Check what, precisely? Aura's models are built on stellar physics principles, established across 900 years of Tanuvin astronomical research. What is it you imagine you might catch that an intelligence with access to the complete historical dataset of Tanuvin stellar observation would miss? Naomi considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. I don't know yet, she admitted. That's rather the point of checking. If I already knew what I'd find, I wouldn't need to look. Bream made a small, dismissive sound and returned to his own console, and Naomi went back to her notebook, quietly aware, as she had been for 4 months, that most of the crew regarded her methodology as a kind of harmless eccentricity, the human who still did things the slow way, tolerated because the mission's diplomatic framework required it, not because anyone particularly valued what she produced. Director Yeshel Kaur, the mission's senior officer, had been polite about it. In the careful, professionally neutral way career administrators managed personnel they didn't quite know what to do with. Your work is thorough, Dr. Fielding, she had told Naomi during their most recent review. I simply note that it rarely produces conclusions that differ meaningfully from Aura's own outputs, and it consistently takes considerably longer to reach them. It was true mostly. In 4 months, Naomi's careful, hand-verified analysis had matched Aura's predictions in every case but one, a minor discrepancy in a gas giant's magnetic field modeling that nobody had considered significant enough to investigate further. She understood, intellectually, why her methodology looked, from the outside, like an inefficient redundancy. She kept doing it anyway, because 20 years of training had taught her a lesson the Tanuvin's remarkable modeling technology had apparently made obsolete. That elegant, confident answers were exactly the kind you needed to check most carefully, precisely because their elegance made them easy to trust without verification. The anomaly appeared 11 weeks into the survey, during a routine data-gathering pass near a binary star system the mission had catalogued as Vesek Zeta, a pair of aging stars locked in a slow gravitational dance that had, according to every existing model, another several thousand years before either component approached any kind of critical instability. Aura flagged it first, as Aura flagged everything first, a subtle gravitational fluctuation in the smaller of the two stars, well within established parameters for normal stellar variance, generating a predictive model within minutes that classified the fluctuation as a minor, non-threatening anomaly consistent with known patterns of late-stage stellar activity. Recommend continued standard survey operations, Aura reported, its voice carrying the calm, measured confidence that had, over the mission's 11 weeks, become simply background noise to most of the crew. Probability of significant escalation, less than 0.3%. Director Kaur authorized the ship to maintain its current survey position, a decision that drew no objection from anyone on the bridge except quietly from Naomi, who had pulled the raw gravitational data onto her own console and begun, out of habit rather than any specific suspicion, working through the underlying calculations by hand. It took her nearly 6 hours to notice the discrepancy, working alone in the ship's secondary lab long after the rest of the science team had moved on to other tasks, confident in Aura's assessment. The fluctuation Aura had classified as minor variance didn't match. When Naomi traced the underlying physics manually, the established pattern for late-stage stellar activity at all. It matched instead something considerably rarer and more dangerous, the early signature of a gravitational collapse cascade, a phenomenon so uncommon that Naomi suspected Aura's model, built on 900 years of Tanuvin observational data, had simply never encountered enough real examples to weight the possibility appropriately. She checked her work twice more before she brought it to anyone, because she understood, with the particular weariness of 4 months spent being politely dismissed, exactly how this conversation was going to go. "You believe Aura's model is wrong," Chief Analyst Bream said, in a tone that made clear precisely how unlikely he considered this. "I believe Aura's model is working correctly with the wrong underlying assumption," Naomi said, projecting her hand-calculated data alongside Aura's original assessment on the lab's central display. Aura classified this fluctuation using the standard late-stage stellar variance pattern, because that's the pattern that fits 99.6% of the data in its training set. "But look at the actual gravitational signature here," she highlighted a section of the readout. "It's not oscillating the way normal variance oscillates, it's compounding. Each fluctuation is slightly larger than the last, in a pattern that matches gravitational collapse cascade signatures far more closely than standard variance. Gravitational collapse cascades in binary systems of this classification occur," Bream said, "according to Aura's complete historical dataset, at a documented rate of approximately 1 event per 11,000 years of continuous stellar observation. You're proposing that we are currently witnessing one of the rarest stellar events in recorded Tanuvin astronomical history, based on 6 hours of manual calculation, over an intelligence with access to 9 centuries of verified data." "I'm proposing," Naomi said, keeping her voice level despite the frustration building beneath it, "that rare events are exactly the kind of thing a predictive model trained overwhelmingly on common patterns is most likely to misclassify, because it has almost no examples of the rare pattern to weight against the common one. That's not a flaw in Aura specifically. That's a structural limitation of any predictive system built on historical frequency. The rarer something is, the less reliable the model's classification of it becomes, precisely because rarity means less training data." Bream considered this for a moment, and Naomi allowed herself, briefly, to hope he might actually engage with the substance of what she was saying. "Aura's confidence interval on this classification exceeds 99%, he said instead. "I am not prepared to recommend altering our survey position and potentially costing this mission weeks of valuable research time based on a manual recalculation that contradicts a confidence interval that high. Confidence intervals measure how consistent a model's outputs are with its own training assumptions," Naomi said. "They don't measure whether those assumptions are correct in the first place. Aura is very confident it's looking at normal variance, because normal variance is what it's seen 1,000 times before. It's never seen a collapse cascade before, because collapse cascades are rare enough that 900 years of Tanuvin observation has apparently never caught one this early. That's not evidence the classification is right. If anything, it's evidence the model has no real basis for confidence either way." "I will bring your concern to Director Core," Bream said, in a tone that made clear he considered this a formality rather than a genuine escalation. "But I want to be candid with you, Dr. Fielding. This is not the first time your manual methodology has produced a conclusion at odds with Aura's assessment, and it has, in every previous instance, turned out to be an error in your own calculation rather than a genuine flaw in the model." "That's true," Naomi said. "It's also true that checking has cost this mission nothing but my own time in every one of those cases. I'd rather be wrong quietly, 6 times, than be right once and have nobody listen because I've been wrong before." Director Core reviewed Naomi's analysis that evening, with the careful, professionally neutral attention she brought to every disputed matter aboard her ship, and reached, in the end, the decision Naomi had privately expected. "Aura's confidence interval is extremely high," Core said. "Your manual analysis is thorough, Dr. Fielding, and I don't doubt the rigor of your methodology. But I have to weigh 6 hours of manual recalculation against a predictive system with access to 900 years of observational data and a verified accuracy record that has held, without significant exception, for the entire duration of this mission. I'm not prepared to alter our survey position on the strength of a single disputed classification." I understand, Naomi said, and meant it. She did understand, even as the understanding sat uneasily alongside her own certainty that something in Aura's assessment was badly, dangerously wrong. Can I ask for one accommodation, if we're maintaining position? I'd like continuous access to the raw gravitational feed so I can keep tracking the fluctuation pattern manually. If it's normal variance, my monitoring costs nothing. If it's not, I'd like to have current data the moment it matters. Core considered this, and finding no real cost in granting it, agreed. Naomi spent the next 18 hours in the secondary lab, tracking the fluctuation pattern by hand, watching each new data point arrive from the ship's sensors and confirming, with mounting and unwelcome certainty, that the compounding pattern she'd identified wasn't slowing, wasn't stabilizing, wasn't behaving anything like the normal variance Aura continued, hour after hour, to confidently classify it as. By the 19th hour, the fluctuation had nearly doubled in magnitude from her first measurement, and Naomi understood, with the cold clarity of a scientist watching a hypothesis confirm itself in exactly the way she'd hoped it wouldn't, that she was running out of time to be believed. She found Ensign Tailai's row in the ship's observation deck during what should have been his off-duty rotation, staring out at the distant twin points of light that marked Vesek Theta's binary stars, and something in his expression, thoughtful, slightly uneasy, made Naomi pause rather than continue past. "You've been watching the readings too," she said. Tailai's, young even by Tanuvin standards, still carrying the careful deference of a junior crew member, navigating a ship full of officers considerably senior to him, glanced at her with something like relief. "I have," he admitted. "I'm not permitted to formally dispute Chief Analyst Bream's assessment. I'm not senior enough for my opinion to carry weight in a formal review, but I've been tracking the same data you have, Dr. Fielding, on my own console, off-duty. The pattern doesn't look like variance to me either. It looks like it's building towards something." "It is," Naomi said quietly. "I've run the numbers 11 times now. It's a collapse cascade. I'm as certain of that as I've been of anything in my career, and I still can't get Director Core to authorize repositioning the ship, because Aura's confidence interval says otherwise, and Aura has never been wrong before." "Aura has never encountered this before," Tailai said slowly, working through the logic himself. "That's different from never having been wrong." "That's exactly the distinction nobody on this ship seems willing to make," Naomi said. "I don't blame them entirely. Aura's methodology is remarkable. 900 years of data, processed faster and more thoroughly than any human team could manage. I understand why trusting it feels rational. But rare events are exactly the blind spot every predictive system has, because rare events are, by definition, underrepresented in whatever historical dataset the system learned from. The rarer the event, the less the model actually knows, even when its confidence interval says otherwise." Tailai's was quiet for a long moment, looking back out at the twin stars. "What happens," he asked slowly, "if you're right and nobody moves the ship in time?" Naomi had run that calculation too, more than once, in the 18 hours since Core's decision. "If this is a genuine collapse cascade, and it's progressing at the rate my data suggests, we have somewhere between 6 and 14 hours before the smaller star's gravitational instability generates a burst event severe enough to seriously damage anything within our current survey range, possibly destroy it outright, depending on the burst's intensity, which I can't calculate precisely because there's so little historical data on collapse cascades to model against." "That's not a risk Director Core can ignore," Tailai said, "not if you can show her the trajectory clearly enough." "I've tried," Naomi said. "The problem isn't the data. The problem is that everyone on this ship has spent 900 years learning to trust Aura's confidence intervals, and I'm asking them to distrust one, on the strength of 18 hours of manual tracking against 9 centuries of institutional confidence. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing for them to hesitate over. I just think we're running out of time for the hesitation." The burst event began at hour 16, 2 hours past the outer edge of Naomi's projected window, close enough that she would later reflect, with grim satisfaction, that her math had been more conservative than the reality, rather than less. Aura's alert, when it finally came, carried none of the calm confidence that had characterized every prior assessment of the phenomenon. "Anomalous gravitational event detected," the ship's intelligence reported, and something in its measured voice carried, for the first time in the mission's duration, an unmistakable note of algorithmic distress. "Magnitude exceeds all classified parameters, reclassifying event as critical stellar instability. Recommend immediate evasive repositioning. I did not anticipate this outcome." I apologize for the error in my prior assessment. The bridge, which had been operating on the assumption of routine survey conditions moments earlier, exploded into motion, Director Core issuing rapid evasive maneuver orders, Chief Analyst Bream frantically pulling updated data onto his console with an expression of dawning horror, the entire crew scrambling to respond to a threat that Aura's own model, until 60 seconds earlier, had assured them carried less than a 1% probability of materializing. Naomi was already at her console when the alert sounded, because she had, for the past 16 hours, never really left it. She pulled up her own tracked data, cross-referenced it rapidly against the incoming burst readings, and felt her stomach drop at what she found. Director, she called, cutting through the bridge's controlled chaos with the flat, urgent clarity she'd learned, across 20 years of research crises, cut through panic better than volume ever did. Aura's evasive recommendation is based on standard collapse event escape vectors. This isn't a standard collapse event. The burst pattern is asymmetric. It's going to propagate faster along the binary system's orbital plane than perpendicular to it, because of how the smaller star's gravitational instability is interacting with its companion's mass. If we retreat along the vector Aura's recommending, we're moving directly into the burst's fastest expansion path, not away from it. Aura Core snapped, confirm or deny this assessment immediately. There was a pause, brief, but longer than any pause Aura had produced in the mission's 11 weeks, the pause of a system genuinely, uncomfortably uncertain of its own output for perhaps the first time in its operational history. I do not have sufficient historical data to model asymmetric burst propagation with confidence, Aura admitted. Dr. Fielding's manual analysis identifies a physical mechanism I had not incorporated into my evasive vector calculation. I cannot confirm her assessment with certainty. I also cannot confidently rule it out. That's not good enough, Bream said, his earlier condescension entirely gone, replaced by something closer to genuine fear. We need a vector now. Then use mine, Naomi said, already transmitting her calculated escape trajectory to the helm console, a vector angled hard against the binary system's orbital plane, away from what her manual analysis suggested would be the burst's fastest expansion path, rather than the straightforward retreat Aura had originally recommended. I can't give you a confidence interval as clean as Aura's usually are. I can give you the physics, and 18 hours of data that's been tracking exactly the pattern I predicted, right up until the moment it stopped being a prediction and started being an emergency. Director Core looked for one long, agonizing second between Aura's uncertain silence and Naomi's steady, urgent conviction, and made the decision that would, in the following minutes, determine whether the Threnic Veil and its entire crew survived the next hour. Helm, she said, execute Dr. Fielding's vector. Now. The burst, when it fully propagated 11 minutes later, expanded exactly along the asymmetric path Naomi had calculated, a wave of gravitational and radiative energy tearing through the binary system's orbital plane with a violence that would have caught the Threnic Veil directly in its path had the ship followed Aura's original evasive recommendation. Instead, angled hard against that plane, the ship rode out the burst's edge, a rough, violent several minutes of alarms and structural stress warnings in Naomi's own white-knuckled grip on her console. As the Threnic Veil shuddered through turbulence, no vessel its size should reasonably have survived, but survived regardless, emerging on the other side of the burst's expansion with damaged but functional systems, and a crew, shaken but alive, that had come within minutes of an entirely different outcome. The bridge was quiet, in the aftermath, in the particular stunned way that follows any crisis narrowly survived. Damage report, Core said finally, her voice steadier than her hands, which Naomi noticed were still faintly trembling against her console. Significant but survivable across all decks, came the response, several minutes later, once the ship's engineering teams had completed their initial assessment. No casualties, no breaches. Core closed her eyes briefly, then turned to look at Naomi, still seated at her console, the physical notebook she'd been working from for 18 hours sitting open beside her, covered in dense, handwritten calculations that had, in the end, meant the difference between the ship's survival and its destruction. Aura's confidence interval, Core said slowly, was 99.6%. I know, Naomi said quietly. Your manual analysis, Core continued, had no comparable confidence measure at all. You could offer me physics and 18 hours of tracked data, and nothing resembling the statistical certainty Aura has provided for every other assessment across this entire mission. I know that too, Naomi said. I couldn't give you certainty, Director. Nobody could about something this rare. All I could give you was a mechanism that made physical sense, checked as carefully as I knew how to check it, against a model that was very confident about something it had never actually encountered before. Kor was quiet for a long moment, looking at the notebook, at the dense, careful handwriting that had, over 4 months, become something the crew regarded as a curious, faintly outdated eccentricity. "I nearly didn't authorize your vector," she admitted. "I want you to understand that clearly, Dr. Fielding, because I think it matters more than the outcome. I trusted 900 years of institutional confidence over 18 hours of manual verification, right up until the moment Aura itself admitted it couldn't confirm its own recommendation. If that admission had come 30 seconds later, I don't know that we'd be having this conversation." "I understand," Naomi said. "I don't think that was an unreasonable instinct, Director. I'd have made the same call in your position most days. Aura's right far more often than it's wrong. That's exactly why it's so dangerous when it's wrong about something rare enough that its own confidence can't be trusted to know the difference." Aura's formal incident review, filed 3 days later once the ship's systems had been fully repaired, and the crew's initial shock had settled into something closer to reflection, contained a section that Chief Analyst Bream, reviewing the document alongside Naomi in the ship's main lab, read twice before speaking. "Aura has requested," Bream said slowly, "a formal revision to its training methodology, specifically incorporating manual verification protocols for any stellar classification falling below a certain historical frequency threshold. It has specifically cited Dr. Fielding's methodology as the model for that revision." "That's generous of it," Naomi said, though she meant it without irony. "I owe you an apology," Bream said, and Naomi looked up from her own work, surprised. Bream had never in 4 months said anything remotely close to those words. "I dismissed your methodology as inefficient redundancy for the entire duration of this mission. I now understand, mistaking speed and confidence for reliability. Those are not the same quality, and I allowed myself to conflate them because Aura's outputs have been extraordinarily consistent, right up until the one moment consistency mattered most." "You're not wrong that manual verification is slower," Naomi said. "It is 6 times slower by your own count. I'm not going to pretend that's not a real cost, but slow and correct beats fast and confident in the specific cases where confidence outruns actual certainty. The trouble is you can't always tell in advance which case you're in. That's why I check, not because I distrust Aura generally. Because I don't trust any system, human or otherwise, to know the difference between "I've seen this pattern before" and "I understand what this pattern actually is," without someone occasionally doing the slow, unglamorous work of finding out by hand. Ensign Talais Rowe, who had been quietly observing the exchange from a nearby console, spoke up for the first time. "Will you teach me," he asked, "the manual methodology? I'd like to learn it properly, not just enough to double-check Aura's outputs on my own time when I'm not supposed to be doing it at all." Naomi looked at him for a long moment, then at Bream, then at the dense, handwritten notebook still sitting open on her console. 4 months of careful, unglamorous, quietly dismissed work that had, in the end, been the only thing standing between the Threnic Veil and a burst event no advanced model had seen coming. "I'd like that," she said. "Bring your own notebook. It's slower with a data slate. You want the friction of writing it out by hand. It forces you to actually think through each step, instead of letting the tool think for you. That's rather the whole point." Talais smiled and reached for a blank notebook from the shelf behind him, and Naomi Fielding, 4 months into a mission that had made her, quietly and without complaint, the ship's least favorite scientist, allowed herself, for the first time since arriving aboard the Threnic Veil, to simply feel useful, in exactly the unglamorous, patient way she had always known how to be. Outside the observation deck's wide viewport, the twin stars of Vessex Zeta burned on, quieter now, their gravitational dance settling back into something closer to the pattern Aura's models had always expected. Except now, somewhere in the ship's growing archive of Hardwin data, there existed a permanent record of the one time that pattern had broken, caught not by 900 years of institutional confidence, but by one careful woman with a notebook, who had simply refused to stop checking.